You got my sermon? Just a minute here, we get it. We're in the book of Nehemiah, and talking about that and seeing what Nehemiah has some lessons for us and what we can do and encourage one another and help one another. We had, in the book of Nehemiah, we had an application to this, and the first time we talked about it, we said, we want you to go and this week pray for someone and make that our challenge. And then last week we talked about forgiving someone and seeing what we can do to help and forgive and talk about applying lessons from Nehemiah. And we don't have it up on the... Do we have it? We do. It's not up here. Okay. Well, as long as it's up there, it's all right. There. Lessons from Nehemiah. We're going to talk about stepping out on faith because that's what Nehemiah did. And you talk about, well, what does it mean to have faith? And what does it mean to step out on faith? And you also oftentimes hear the term of stepping out on faith. And does this mean that you just blindly go and do something and it's just, I just step out on faith when I do it? And so when we do talk about stepping out on faith, and that's what Nehemiah did. He said, there's something I need to do, and I believe that God will be with me in this. And when we read Scripture, as we talk about our Scripture reading, that he said, this is the work that God has for me. And so I'm going to do it. But I'm going to step out on faith when I do it. It's not a blind faith that I don't know what's going to be done or what's going to happen. It's something that we know that as God has been with His people in the past, as God has supported His people in the past and has prospered His people in the past, it will do the same with us today. He will be with us and He will strengthen us. And we have that. Stand strong in the Lord and in the power of His might. Ephesians 6 verse 10. And so it is through Him and through the things that He does for us that we continue stepping out on faith. We know that Peter stepped out on faith, literally stepped out on faith when he stepped out of the boat onto the water. He said, Lord, if it's you, bid me to come out on the water. And Jesus said, come. And he stepped out. And he walked on the water. Now, we're not going to do any water walking today, but we want to step out on faith and do something that we haven't done before. And that's the book of Nehemiah. He said there's something that needs to be done, and I look around, and I guess it's going to be me that does it. I can't depend on anyone else. It's just God calls me. If each one of us would say, it's up to me. Well, we just look around and say, well, what things need to be done? What can I do? Well, just look around. That's what happened with Nehemiah. He asked certain people as they came up from Jerusalem, how are the people doing? And he said, it's not good. They're in reproach. And then Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 17. I said unto them, you see the distress that we are in? Let's just pause right there. Whenever it was that you went and asked, can I pray for you? Did you find anyone in distress? Do we have people in distress today? Yes, we do. And it's not so much so that we need to have them come and attend our services, although that would be wonderful. It's not so much that they need to be prayed for, and that would be wonderful that we do that. It's not so much that they need to be baptized and to give their life to Christ and become Christians and become part of the church family, and that's wonderful to do that. First and foremost, it is that they need to see that they are in distress and they have a Savior. And when that's the message that we need to present to people, that things can get better with God is in it. You live your life without God, you live your life with God. With God is a whole lot better than without God. Trouble comes either way. Whether you live your life for God or live your life without God, your trouble comes. Jesus said in John 16, verse 33, in this world you will have tribulation. You will have it. Whether you live for Him or whether you don't, you will have tribulation. But He said, in finishing that, He said, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. And so it is that we face the world in tribulation and in distress and despair with one who is overcome or without one who is overcome. And so we step out on faith with the one who is overcome. And we walk with him instead of walking alone in this world. And what does it mean to step out on faith? He said, I said to those who are in distress, that how Jerusalem laid waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of God that was good upon me, and the king's word that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let us rise and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. There's always a good work needing to be done. It's the Lord's work. Never ending. Never. And so who does he call to do this good work? Who will rise up and say, I'll step out on faith? We'll go where we haven't gone before. Now there's some things. What does it mean to step out on faith? Number one, faith may require patience. Nehemiah in chapter 1 just didn't hear the people in distress and say, well, I'm going to do something that's going to be done right now. It took several months passed before he went to the king and made requests. He had spent time in prayer. He spent time in thinking about things. Faith requires patience also. You're going to step out on faith and say, listen now, the preacher said, let's do things that we haven't done before, and this is what we're going to do. We're just going to go hog wild and just blow the top off this. And he said, maybe we need to think about things first. Have a little patience. Have a little planning. Have a little prayer. Stepping out on faith may require patience, because sometimes it is that our timetable is not God's timetable. It may be we're doing the work of God, but we do the work of God in the timetable of God also. And so maybe it is that we need to get in sync with God and God's plan and how things are going to work together. It may be that before, as Nehemiah did, before he began this good work, he made plans, and he had prayers, and he had patience. Stepping out on faith may require a little patience first. Stepping out on faith demands responsible service also. If we're going to step out on faith, it means that, like Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah was in the temple, and God said to him, who shall I send? And Nehemiah said, here am I, Lord, send me. You know, what we sing about it, we're in the Lord's army, right? We sing that Vacation Bible School song, I'm in the Lord's army. And we sing the song, soldiers of Christ arise. I'm a soldier of the Lord. I'm in the Lord's army. You know, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, when we read about stand strong in the power of his might, put on the whole armor of God, that we may be ready to fight. We put on that helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, feet shod with the gospel of peace. We have the shield of faith, the sword of the Spirit. And we're ready to go fight. We're the Lord's army, and we're ready. We're signed up. Soldiers of Christ, arise and do it. We need to be in the service. Some of you are in the Lord's army, but you're in the secret service. You know, well, I don't want to be known. I don't want to fight too much with this. You know, I don't want to be a front line back here. I'll be back here. You know, and we'll let others fight the good fight. It requires service. And you just point your finger to yourself. What am I doing stepping out on faith? I'm in the Lord's army. What am I doing? Soldiers of Christ, arise. The time is now. We're fighting a serious fight of salvation with eternity. Whether we spend heaven or hell for all eternity, we're fighting that battle, and others are fighting that battle. We're not just building physical walls for protection of a holy city physically. We're fighting for heaven. And so it may be that we need to sign up for service and be serious about our service. Faith also may require taking risk. Here's Nehemiah in the city of Shushan. Everything's going all right. He's from Jerusalem, but he's hundreds of miles away. He's there. The Babylonians had captured him, had taken him off into captivity. Now the Persians are the world empire in control. They said, whoever wants to go back home can go back home. They'd spent 70 years in captivity. Several were going back home. They go back home. The city walls have been torn down. The temple has been torn down. The gates burned. It's just in shambles. Whenever the Babylonians came through, they just destroyed the city, ransacked it. And there it was, and laying waste, the city of God, the holy city. We are God's holy people. We don't depend on Jerusalem like they did there with the Judaism, but we are the church. He lives with it in us. How's God's dwelling place in you? Is it in shambles? In need of repair? And that's what we're here for, to encourage one another and help one another. It may require taking risk. Nehemiah said, I'm going to leave where I am and I'm going to go to Jerusalem. There were risks involved in travel. He received letters from the king. They said, let me have letters from the king that I can travel safely through these lands. There were risks whenever he went to Jerusalem. He faced opposition. It was that he took a lot of risk. But there was a job to be done, and he said, I'm going to do it. I may face what I've never faced before. I may face ridicule, and he did. I may face scorn, and he did. I may face physical attack, and it was that they were ready to build the wall in spite of their enemies. Step out and take a risk. Go where you've never gone before. Faith may also, that faith and prayer are inseparable. I typed in how many prayers are there in Nehemiah. You can just find out anything on the internet, and it brought up these 10 times it's mentioned. Sometimes it's just mentioned about prayer, and sometimes it's mentioned a phrase. You know that particular phrase is addressed to God. 10 times it is that they have their prayers in the book of Nehemiah. You can type it in and find all those prayers yourself there. Prayer and faith are inseparable. You can't say, well, I'm stepping out on faith without stepping out on prayer. Yeah, I'm stepping out on faith. You bow down your knees in prayer. One of the first things it was whenever Nehemiah heard that there was distress in Jerusalem, he went to God in prayer. And just wrap yourself in prayer. But just stepping out on faith doesn't mean that you step away from prayer. It means that we embrace that and we go to our Father in heaven, and when we can have that great privilege to do that. And so whenever it is that we step out, remember that faith and prayer are inseparable. Faith and planning are not enemies. Well, I'm just going to step out on faith. Well, what are you going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. The Lord's just going to lead me, and He's going to let me go, and I don't know what is going to happen and what's going to do, but I'm just going to step out on faith, and here we go. Well, no. Nehemiah made his plans. Several months by the time that he heard there was distress in Jerusalem to the time that he went to the king, and when he went to the king said, well, what are you going to do? And Nehemiah said, I'm glad you asked that. That's kind of reading between the lines. But here's my plan, and he laid it all out. He said, I need letters from you to address the people in Jerusalem, to let me know that I'm coming from you, and I have authority from you to do the things that I'm going to do. I need letters from you to let me pass through the land safely, through that they'll let me pass. I need wood and there's wood over here. I need you to let me have access to that wood. We're going to take that wood. We're going to take it down to Jerusalem. He had it 1, 2, 3. He said, this is what we're going to do. He planned. When he got to Jerusalem, he didn't just go to Jerusalem and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Y'all coming to me? He searched throughout the city. He said, this is the situation, and he had plans. And then when he did call the people together, he had a plan. Stepping out on faith doesn't mean that it's separate from planning. Plan your work and work your plan. Some people are better at planning than others. Some say, well, we just need to do this, and without a plan. And I know some people are that way. I'm kind of that way. My daughter, Jana, is not that way. Everything has to have a plan. She's a list maker. 1, 2, 3. Everything has a plan. We go on vacation, and she'd have a list of what we're going to do. Well, we kind of had a list of what we're going to do. We're going to go down to Florida. We're going to have fun. That's my list. She'd make a list. The first thing she'd put on that day, she'd say, wake up. That's how detailed she was. You know, this is the time we're going to wake up with it. And so everything was planned from there then on. Some people are great at making plans, and some people are just, well, we're just going to go and you know, we'll see what happens. But faith and planning are not enemies. Because we have a plan does not mean we're not stepping out on faith. Nehemiah had a plan, and he worked his plan. Faith may bring opposition, and it does. When we step out on faith, whenever we get excited about serving God, about becoming a Christian, when we try to talk to others about it, we face opposition. You would think that he would go to Jerusalem and say, hey, we're going to build the walls, and things are going to be better here at Jerusalem, that people would say, great, that's wonderful. Let's get excited about it. And some people did, and some people didn't. He faced some opposition. Whenever it was that the people began to build the walls, they began to ridicule with them with scorn, and they would belittle them, and they would say, well, look at that wall. That's not much of a wall. You're not much of a wall builder. Well, if a fox jumped up on that wall, it would tumble down. You're not doing a very good job. And sometimes it is when we step out on faith, we kind of feel that way ourselves anyway. That I'm not doing a very good job. I haven't done this before. I don't know what I'm doing. And sometimes that ridicule shuts us down. It didn't stop Nehemiah. And so they continued on. And so much so that they had so much opposition that they, as they built the wall, one person would build the wall, and another person stood with a sword and a shield to protect them, because the enemies could attack at any time. They attacked them with words, and they threatened to attack them physically also. Yes, we face opposition because the devil is real. And the devil does not want us to get excited about doing the Lord's work. The devil does not want us to step out on faith. The devil says, listen, you're doing just fine where you are. Don't worry about growing. Don't worry about building. Don't worry about adding to it. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about growing. You're just fine where you are. When we step out on faith, we will face opposition. Didn't Jesus? No. And last of all, faith without works is useless. That's what James would say in the book of James. Faith without works is dead. You say you have faith? Show me your faith. I'll show you my faith by my works. Faith without works is useless. And so Nehemiah had a plan, and he worked his plan. In 52 days, the walls were built. For the people had a mind to work. When you come with a plan, when you come with faith, and when you step out on the faith, when you have a goal in mind and say, this is what we're going to do, people can get excited about it. They say, I want to be a part of the Lord's work. I want to step out on faith. Stepping out on faith does not mean you go blindly. Nehemiah didn't. He planned it. Okay. Planned his work and worked his plan. What about us? As you read through the book of Nehemiah, I challenge you one time to say, have a prayer for someone. And then I challenge you, forgive someone this week. And I'm going to challenge you this week to do something good for someone. Do a good deed. I don't know what it might be, but it is that as Nehemiah went and built the walls, he was fine where he was, hundreds of miles away. The wall was distant. But something over there, the people needed some help, and Nehemiah said, I'm going to help them. But I challenge you this week, do something good for someone. Do a good deed. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, Jesus would say, let your light so shine among men that they may see your good works. And it's just not that we would see a good work, but glorify your Father which is in heaven. Do a good deed that God may be glorified. Our lesson is up. If we can encourage you and help you and strengthen you in some way, maybe it is that you're thinking about being baptized, give your life to Christ, and say, I want my sins washed away. I want to become a Christian. I want to become part of the family here at Hampton. This is my church home. I want to make it my church home. Won't you come right now while we stand and while we sing?